Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Living in the Gray. My name is Chinyere. If you're new here, welcome. We're writing a vision for the future where we can reclaim the living part of our lives back using tech tools to help us live better lives with content focused on four areas. One, how can we work beyond borders in the trade stack? How can we strengthen that? Two, reimagining our reality through better relationships with one another across borders. Three, personal wealth and well-being, focused on our personal finances, our health. Our health is our wealth is our health. And then four, business basics and fundamentals. And so in this episode, we're going to be focused on the five major keys to accelerate emerging market growth. In our last episode, we really contextualized the data across emerging markets and developed markets to get a better understanding of the macroeconomic environment that we're operating in. Looking at things like real GDP across countries, the Human Development Index scores, the number of patent applications and percent of research and development that's spent in each economy. So it was really interesting to dive into the data. And I encourage you to go back and look at that episode because it helps to contextualize today's. All right, so when people talk about the future of emerging markets, right, across Africa, they mention it's youth, it's scale, it's potential. But potential isn't power until you have a system that can actually help you unlock that. So today, we're going to look at what could potentially accelerate growth in emerging markets, from trade and digital infrastructure to governance and entrepreneurship. We're also going to look at the engine behind all of this, the small businesses. Okay, so DJ Khaled talks about major keys. And so the first major key is around trade. Emerging markets, like we've said, are full of potential, but you can only really get to long-term growth when you can compete against global players. And the emphasis and focus is really on trade. Just think about it for a second. For many emerging regions, if we can strengthen trade within our own borders and the neighboring countries, it's powerful. Africa's African Continental Free Trade Agreement is an example. It's one of the largest free trade areas globally by the number of nations participating. The idea is pretty simple. If you allow people to exchange goods and services, reducing tariffs, complex custom procedures within a region, you create a more integrated market. Goods, services, even people can flow freely between countries, just like what happens within a single domestic market. Say, for example, the US or the UK. If you saw in the last video, I mentioned about innovation as our engine for economic growth across emerging markets. I talked a bit about what we could look like, what the world could look like if Africa were actually a country, right? And just to contextualize that conversation a little bit, Africa holistically creates about $3.1 trillion in GDP, real GDP annually across its 1.5 billion people. India has 3.8 trillion and it has about 1.5 billion people as well. So that's one way of looking at it. And then if you keep going down, comparing all of the economic activity, again, across Africa, that $3.1 trillion and 1.5 billion people, if you look at France, it's 3.2 trillion and 66 million people. UK, 3.5 trillion in real GDP and 68 million people. Now, if we get down to, let's say, Brazil, for example, they're generating $2.24 trillion with 213 million people. And Nigeria, for example, is doing about a fourth of that, $568 billion in real GDP with 232 million people. So again, looking at the data and insights and information across these different countries, it starts to get you to think about ways in which we could reimagine our borders and reimagine what the AU, if it were functioning properly, could potentially look more like the EU in the way that there's a single currency and the way that people can freely move between borders. So again, I'd encourage you to go back to that video and take a look and get a little bit more data and insight. So back to this. AFTA in its full glory would really enable competition, creating more opportunities for businesses of all sizes. And this could lead to lower prices for people like us who are buying goods and services. The real magic, though, happens in regional value chains. So instead of individual countries just exporting raw material, imagine neighboring countries actually collaborating to produce high-value goods together. One nation might specialize in sourcing raw materials. Let's take ECOWAS as an example, right? So I'm based in Nigeria, the Economic Community of West African States. There are 12, Nigeria is one. But let's say Ghana, right? Significant producer of the world's cocoa beans. Let's say they're the ones harvesting and growing those cocoa beans and sending them to Togo. And let's say Togo is now processing those beans, getting them down to a place where they can actually be used. Now let's say Senegal is actually doing the final packaging and exporting, right? This shared production allows individual countries to get really, really good at their part in the value chain, right? But then it also boosts the value of the exports and creates more skilled jobs while fostering deeper economic ties within the region. It's not unique to Africa. There's opportunities across Latin America, Asia, and beyond. And back to the agreement, right? The agreement itself isn't enough, but in order to really make things like this work, this idea come to life, we know we need the infrastructure, right? The roads, the railways, the ports, reliable energy, and the internet connectivity. This creates seamless trade. We know we need streamlined trade facilitation. So this is about the customs processes, clear and consistent trade rules that everybody can actually follow. We also know we need skills, right? Industrialization happened in many advanced economies, and that's really where a lot of skills were developed. It entailed a lot of training on the job. So we need similar efforts across emerging markets to help upskill and enable this work to take place. And of course, we need government. We need political will. We need commitment. Governments actually need to be committed to implementing this agreement and executing on it. So intra-regional trade and connecting regional value chains are really a powerful pathway for emerging markets to accelerate GDP and take a place on the global economic stage. That was the first key. Major key number 2 is the digital economy. So there's 3 things that really make up the digital economy. 1, the digital infrastructure, highways of connectivity. 2, the innovation hubs. And 3, making money move fast. So on the first one with digital infrastructure, think of it as building the digital roads and the bridges of the 21st century. We need high-speed internet everywhere, right? Reaching everyone, not just the cities. So imagine a farmer checking market prices on his phone or her phone, students accessing world-class education right from their home, businesses connecting with the global market thanks to better internet. But to make this happen, we know governments need better policies, and we need to create partnerships to build the networks of the future. Actually making it affordable for everyday people to also use is really important. The innovation hubs and the startup ecosystem is really what powers the actual creativity and innovation of an economy. These are the engines of new ideas and job creation where brilliant minds, right? Building the next big thing can come together. But these hubs, they need funding. They need to be able to sustain. Regulation needs to encourage creativity, not stifle it. And we need help protecting these ideas, so stronger IP and patent laws and regulation. We need the talented people who have these spaces to actually come together. Because when these kinds of hubs can thrive and people can connect with each other, that's when economic magic can happen. And the last piece of the digital economy is about the digital financial services. So mobile money, right? I mean, the fintech wave across Africa and across emerging markets has been instrumental in moving us to where we are today. Think MoneyPoint and Paystack and Flutterwave and Lemfi and OPay and Bamboo and PiggyVest. Game changers, right? Millions of people who were not part of the traditional banking system can now save. They can now send money, invest, and actually access credit right from their phones. This helps to boost productivity and brings even more people into the economy. So by investing in digital infrastructure, nurturing these innovation hubs, and expanding financial services, these are the levers that can actually help emerging markets fuel growth. Major key number 3, human capital. You know what the real engine of any economy is? Think about it with me, people. Hint, I just said it. It's the people, right? So to unlock the full potential, though, we need education and health. A skilled and healthy population isn't like a nice to have. It's how an economy is actually fueled, creating a workforce that's ready for the jobs of the future. The first one on education, at this point, it's not about getting a degree, right? We need to match people with the skills that are needed in industries that meets with the advanced technology. So I'll say that again. We need people to learn the skills in particular sectors that matches the advanced technology that's coming out at a rapid pace every day, right? From tech powering the future of logistics to moving goods across the continent to smart farming to feed our growing population. So this means tailoring the education, making sure that the vocational training universities are actually caught up and they're actually teaching the skills that are needed for the future. Hands-on learning, more practical experience, more computers in hands, more internships and collaborations across industries, and future-focused skills. I cannot tell you the conversations that I've had with universities who can't quite keep up with the changing pace of technology. And it's concerning because it means that the students who are in these schools aren't learning what is required for the future. The other balance of this scale for resources or people is really around investing in health, right? So a healthy workforce is productive. When people are sick, they can't work. Businesses suffer. The economy takes a hit. So what do we need to do? Expanding access to quality health care, making sure that everybody has the care that they need, no matter what income they have, is important. I think what's even more important than that is teaching people about preventative care. It's something that's been important to me for such a long time and something that is not incentivized in the design of today's system. Keeping people healthy in the first place through education and public health initiatives will save on healthcare spend and will actually keep people healthier longer. The last one is in healthcare infrastructure. So the hospitals and the clinics and the healthcare professionals leveraging more technology. I'm excited to see robotics in humanoid robots in the healthcare system to offset so much of the deficit that exists in the healthcare system, despite how much is spent in healthcare. So focusing on education that meets industry demands, prioritizing the health of our people, it's the smartest economic strategy for sustainable growth. On to major key number 4. So this is about resource management. Emerging markets, especially across Africa, are what I call rich, right? We're talking incredible natural resources, cultural depth, and populations on the rise. But are we actually cashing in on what's ours? We send most of our raw materials out at cents on the dollar. So how can we move from just digging things up to actually building real wealth? It comes down to 2 things: value addition and diversification. Think of it like this. On value addition, instead of just selling the raw gold, why don't we just turn it into the jewelry here? Instead of shipping the unprocessed cocoa beans, let's just make the chocolate. But what does this actually mean? It breaks down to processing at home. So building the industries and the factories within our emerging markets to actually process our raw materials into finished goods. And we know that electricity is a challenge, but how can we leverage ideas and innovation to reduce the cost of producing an electricity so that we can build the manufacturing facilities to do this work? More jobs, more skills. Value addition creates higher paying jobs and allows people to actually develop specializations. And then it boosts exports. So selling products that cost more on the global market mean we earn more and strengthen our economies. I remember I was listening to something and Dangote said, much of what Africa exports is jobs and what we import is poverty. And we really need to turn that around. So on diversification, especially for countries, like Nigeria, like Angola, that heavily rely on oil and other single commodities, it's extremely risky because you are now subject to the winds moving and what countries are paying and what they're not paying. And your economy then ends up being dependent on that. So we need to expand our horizons, investing in and growing other sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, technology, and tourism services, like places Brazil, like Thailand, like Vietnam, which are very, very good examples of countries who've done this well. Creating stability, diversification builds more resilient economies that aren't vulnerable to global price swings if you have a single commodity, like what I mentioned, oil. And it unlocks new potential. So tapping into the creativity and innovation within these diverse sectors helps to create new opportunities and more jobs. So our wealth isn't just underground. It's our ability to add value to resources and build diverse and thriving economies. Okay. Major key number 5, governance and resilience. Imagine, right? Strengthening governance. It's just the foundation of any functioning economy. It means strong institutions, organizations that actually work, they're independent, and they serve the people, not just a select few. This is reliable court systems, effective tax systems, accountable public services members, right? We need a dependable justice system. If people know that they'll be litigated and that it might result in damages and fines, they're likely to curb their behavior accordingly. Singapore is one of the best examples of this. And we need a rule of law that actually has some bite to it, not just bark. So everyone from the smallest businesses to the biggest corporations need to operate under the same clear and fair rules, consistently applied and enforced. This builds the confidence and actually helps to attract investment. Another layer to this is really about the business environment, or honestly, imagination to roam free. So clear and simple rules for businesses to understand the regulation, right? We need straightforward and predictable rules that don't just change anyhow. Real access to cash. So how can we help entrepreneurs get the funding that they need to grow? Right now, it's such a challenge to get access to working capital as an example, because for many traditional banks, the cost of capital is high. And for many venture capital firms, the cost of equity to the founder is high. And so you put founders in a particular precarious place, a tough place, when they have to now figure out what to do, especially with regards to working capital. The next layer now around governance is actually about how we can do all of this sustainably while protecting our air, our water, our food supplies, and more. Africa is on the front lines of climate change, even though we really didn't contribute globally, even across many emerging markets. And so we need to do things like invest in renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and hydro. We need to find ways to actually have sustainable agricultural practices that can withstand climate shocks. And we need to figure out ways to build roads, bridges, and buildings that can actually handle the more extreme events. It's not a quick fix, but strengthening governance and fixing the business environment is really going to take a commitment, a lot of tough choices, and we're going to have to hold our leaders accountable. But the payoff is significant. All right, so that's a round out of our 5 major keys. The thing is, many small businesses and medium-sized businesses are really the ones that actually drive the economy. So all this stuff that we're talking about in ways in which we can accelerate emerging market growth, it comes down to how we support our small to medium businesses. Here's the thing though, 90% of small businesses, small to medium, generate $20 to $500 million annually. Our venture-backed startups, they get a lot of attention, but they actually make up just a few percentage points of the real economy. Research-led innovation doesn't just come from unicorns. It actually comes from solving problems at scale over time. So these are just some things to keep in mind. We need to invest in helping businesses across emerging markets actually do better business. But what does that mean? Major key number 6, bonus key. It's a new vision for emerging market entrepreneurship. This really means it's not just about building the next big insert tech company here, but it's really about setting a vision across emerging markets that we can all get behind, right? Linking emerging markets across Africa, the Caribbean, Brazil, India, the diaspora across the United States, encouraging startups to actually design for distribution, trade, and regional expansion, and building a business that plugs into the trade stack, right? Strengthening our economic infrastructure and making it easier to do trade. This entrepreneurial power that's rising across emerging markets, from the bustling streets of Mumbai to the vibrant favelas of Rio to the tech hubs of Lagos, it's time to rethink entrepreneurship on a global scale across these emerging markets. Not just local, right? But actually powerful connections between us. It's about linking emerging markets directly, So imagine a Brazilian agritech solution that can transform African farming, or an Indian fintech innovation that's actually reaching Southeast Asia, or African mobile money systems that are inspiring Latin America. Some of this is happening today. In order for us to do that, we actually need to create South-South trade corridors. What does that mean? So really creating pathways for goods, services, knowledge, and investment to flow between these regions. That means sharing our experiences, learning from each other's successes, challenges, how we navigate growth, developing the infrastructure, and understanding the complexities between our markets. And then the interregional networks. So within our own regions, how do we actually connect entrepreneurs, investors, institutions across emerging markets to foster collaboration? If we're going to encourage startups in emerging market to design for expansion, right, we need to do it from day one. This means, how do you develop adaptable solutions, products and services that can be tailored to different cultural nuances, economic realities, and infrastructure challenges? Mastering the emerging market dynamics is really important too. This is the nuances of distribution in these different markets, logistics, consumer behavior, trends, data, information that can really help us understand the markets that we're trying to connect. And then partnerships across the South. So collaborating with businesses and organizations in other emerging markets, we need people who want to help forge these relationships and partnerships and connections, who understand the local nuances and the language and the culture that can help bridge those gaps. And then finally, it's about strengthening the emerging market growth stack. So how do we actually create the foundational infrastructure? This means the financial solutions that are inclusive. So scaling mobile money solutions, microfinance, and other digital financial services to reach the underserved populations across markets. The logistics and supply chains, right? These need to be efficient, affordable for actually moving goods between emerging markets. And then the local digital platforms, e-commerce, the education, healthcare platforms that actually cater to the needs and languages of these different regions. It's not just about the individual startup stories. It's about building a powerful and collaborative economic future that's actually driven by the innovation and ingenuity of emerging markets. If we rethink our connection across emerging markets, that should inspire all of us to want to understand how we can better build together to unlock growth and create a more balanced and prosperous global economy. So again, if we want to see our economies accelerate, we need trade, tech, governance, and investment. But none of that will matter unless we actually support the builders, the small business owners, the founders, the operators. And support doesn't just mean capital. It means the knowledge, the systems, and the strategies. So to recap our keys again, our first major key was about the importance of trade, how we can better connect across the trade stack and emerging markets. The second key was about the digital economy, the digital highways, the innovation hubs, and helping money move fast. The third major key was about human capital, the real engine of any economy, but focusing on education and health. The fourth major key was about then resource management, again, because we are rich across our emerging markets, but making sure that we're adding value and that we're diversifying. The fifth major key was about governance and climate resilience. And this is about strengthening our governance, creating a business environment for imagination to roam free, and doing all of this sustainably while protecting our Mother Earth. And then our bonus major key was the new vision for emerging market entrepreneurship and how we connect across markets, and we do that well. So what do you think is the major key that you're going to work on? See you in the next episode.